Hi everyone, in this video lesson we'll be taking a look at some of the early civilizations in South America. And remember, I told you to make sure that you don't mix up the Mesoamerican societies, which reside up in modern day Mexico through parts of Central America, the Maya, the Aztec, etc. For South America, we'll be focusing on what are called the Andean civilizations, called such because they reside in the main geographic feature in this part of South America, which are the Andes Mountains, very long mountain range that goes all the way up and down the west coast. I do want to make you aware that there are civilizations and people who live in the Amazon and in parts of what are called the Pampas. But in terms of the large-scale civilizations, they are found in the Andes Mountains. So that's what we'll focus on today. So even though the most famous, the most large-scale civilization are the Inca, or what are known as the Inca, I am going to just very quickly highlight two pre-Incan Andean civilizations, just to give us context for the fact that there are lots of different individual groups of people living throughout the Andes Mountains before the rise of the Inca. So the two groups I'm just going to briefly introduce you to are the Moche or the Mochica and the Nazca, right, which are both located in like modern day Peru. So the first of the Moche, and all I'll say about the Moche is that they were a people who lived between the mountains and the sea, and then they did a good amount of fishing and agriculture that required what's called terrace farming or building into the sides of the mountains. The Moche, what I think is most fascinating about them is that they made a lot of art that documented everyday life. So we actually have a really good insight into what everyday life was like for them because of this. So this is an example of the Moche pottery, which is a very standardized form of pottery that they created that gives, incredible impressions of the people who lived in that time. So this individual is most likely a warrior, as evidenced by the ornamental helmet that he's wearing. You can see his face is very detailed. It's like you can almost like wait for him to start talking. So there definitely was a class of warriors that was very important. Although they didn't conquer a lot of territory, they seem to have stayed pretty much in their point of origin. A couple of examples of pottery that kind of show just insight into their daily life include this one on the left, which is one of my favorite pieces just because of how much it shows us how little has changed for humans throughout time. This is showing two individuals who are like dragging their friend home because he got too intoxicated at a party. And there are other images like that that confirm what this is. And it's just, I live in the city of Philadelphia. I see these things happen from time to time. And it's a kind of a gentle reminder that we feel like we're so different from people who lived in different places and different times. But there are so many things that go down just the same, regardless of space and time. So yeah, just a little party gone wrong scene. And then here's just a dog. And I just love that they took the time to make a little spotted dog. There's a little cutie pie right there. And just this is a picture from a gallery in what's called the Larco Museum, which has a ton of Moche art. And these are all just unique individual busts of art made for lots of different people. So the Moche, like I said, are unique because when they made art, they didn't just make art that celebrated the kings and the warriors. They made art that, yes, it celebrated the kings and warriors, but also made art about every individual person in society. And through that, we can see that people were very busy just with the tasks of life, of making basic commodities and trading and doing religious ceremonies and just hanging out with their friends and having dogs and stuff like that. So they do seem to be a very, I don't want to say simple people, but they didn't build large-scale empire and they're focused very much on their communities. Another group that I want to briefly mention, just mostly because what they left behind is so cool, are the Nazca. So the Nazca people they live in a very desertous region of Peru. And because of this, they were able to make what are called the Nazca lines, which are these geoglyph patterns that are built in the sand of the desert that they live in that create a lot of mystery. No one really knows why they did that, mostly because the people of the Nazca culture are really tight-lipped and they don't share too much about their religious beliefs and the actions of their ancestors, which I think is kind of cool that they're like, don't worry about it. But then these Nazca lines, I'm going to show you some images of them in the next few slides, are these images, like I said, that are drawn essentially in the sand by removing this top layer of the sand to reveal a lighter color underneath. And the only way you can really see them in their entirety is by flying over top. And so these were made hundreds of years ago. And so there's a lot of questions as to, why did they make them? The theories is that they are communications to their belief in their gods. But, again, that's not been fully confirmed. How did they make them is the big question, because especially some of these that are very elaborate, like the monkey, or these geometric shape, these triangles, are really exact. Like the lines are extremely straight. So it must have been a very complicated process to make them. They've also been able to stay untouched for so long because this is a very still area. The winds don't really whip through this desert. So once these were made, they maintained really well. So you can't really see this very well because this is one of my pictures and I never have a good camera. I have some other pictures just from other professional photographers in a little bit. But this is the whale, which is shown right down here. So this image, kind of outlining it with the little laser guy, is a whale, an orca whale, which shows that they did have connection to the coastline. It was very close to the coastline. This is one of the triangles I was mentioning. Obviously, groups or TV shows like Ancient Aliens lose their minds over the Nazca because there's just so much mystery, and so there's assumptions that these are like UFO landing strips, which, come on, but pretty cool stuff. So this is an individual built up on this hillside that they nicknamed the astronaut. So you can see the little booties right here, little head, he's waving back down. So again, we don't know what this is all about. And this is a slightly enhanced picture so you can see it better. The monkey that I mentioned, right? So each one of these shapes is a couple football field size long. So they're huge. So again, the idea of like how they built them, there's a lot of questions because they didn't have a great vantage point in order to give direction. So a lot of mystery, a lot of intrigue. Yeah, and here's the spider. This one's like really exact. I think this one's excellently made. So yeah, the Nazca, a lot of mystery, a heavily religious people. This much we do know. Oh, and here's just like some cute little kid with their alpaca. If and when you travel Peru, there's a lot of spots like this where local people allow you to take pictures and hang out with their cutie little animals. But you got to pay, which, people got to make money. But look at this little face and this little face too. Cutie pies. All right, so now to the main event, which is looking at the main empire of the Andean civilizations, which are known as the Inca. But similar-ish to the Aztec, the Inca are not actually known as the Inca. Their original name is the Tahuantinsuyo, but over time they become known as the Inca because the term for their leader is the Sapa Inca, and over time it just becomes known as the Kingdom of the Sapa Inca, and thus the Inca for short. But know that they originally are the Tahuantinsuyo, which is in their original language, Quechua. The Inca begin, or the Tahuantinsuyo begin, in the city of Cusco, which is way up in the Andes Mountains. And there's a leader named Pachacuti who's painted here. This is a European painting, so this was made well after the fact. But Pachacuti is credited for really starting the Inca Empire by starting to conquer territories outside of Cusco, but also for creating the cultural foundation of the empire by popularizing the cult of Inti. And remember, when we talk about cults in history, what we're talking about are devotional sects of religions, right? We're not talking about creepy cults where, cult leaders get people to do bad things. In this case, we're talking about a devotion to the sun god. He also started the tradition of the Inti Raymi, which I'll talk about in just a minute. But he, like I said, he's very much credited with starting the Inca Empire. So a little bit on their main god, Inti, who is the Inca sun god. And, no wonder so many cultures throughout time have worshipped the sun. This is a way that Inti is often shown, right, with as the sun with some sort of human face, always radiating out light. And so Patakuti and others worshipped Inti because they believed that Inti was related to the founder of the Inca Empire, or the predecessor of Pachacuti, Manco Capac. And essentially, all of the emperors of the Inca Empire claim to be descended from Inti, right? So they claim to be sons of Inti, which essentially makes them divine. And there's the belief that Inti gave humans the gift of civilization by teaching Manco Capac, his son, how to rule kindly. And we'll talk about what that looks like in the Inca Empire. The other reason the Inti is very important is because they believe him to be vital for life, for all the basic reasons that we look at the sun as vital for life. They understood that the sun and sunlight were essential for crops. So much of their ritual life is centered around honoring Inti. A couple of the gods that I think are important to recognize. So this is as it says here, the Inti family tree. The father of Inti is Viracocha, and he's the creator god. He's often shown holding corn, that might not look like that, but that's what he's holding. There's a lot of stories about how he created the earth, but it's believed that he did create the earth and all the crops and all the animals, and that his wife is Mamacocha, who is the mother of the sea. And so she is credited with creating all waterways, the oceans, the rain, everything like that. So combined, right, they are like earth and water in the creation of all things. They have 3 children who further that creation. So we talked about Inti, the sun god. And then we also have Pachamama, who's shown here on the left. She's Mother Earth. So she cares for the earth. So like her parents created the earth, but she's the one who keeps it healthy and keeps it going. And there are a lot of religious traditions in the Andes that honors her. And then Mama Kia, who's the moon goddess, right? So 2 of the famous children, Viracocha and Mamacocha, are the god of the sun and god of the moon. So there's a lot of duality and just like a lot of like love and worship and care for the environment in the Inca faith system. So I mentioned that Pachacuti started the Inti Raymi, which is a huge festival that honors the sun. And so these are photographs of the Inti Raymi today. They recreate the Inti Raymi every year in June. And, while they don't do all the things that they used to do, because it would include sacrifice of animals, so they skip that part. They simulate it, but they don't actually kill any llamas or anything like that. But they, do a lot of festival, and they dress people up in classic Incan clothing. People represent the different parts of the Inca Empire, and they all arrive at this holy spot in Cusco, known as Sacsayhuaman, which is a built-up religious center. All these rocks are imported from pretty far away, all without the help of animals. One thing I want us to remember when we look at the architecture of the Inca and anyone in the Americas is that they did everything through human labor because they didn't have any animals that really could help them do manual labor. So just kind of keep that in mind. A big part of the Inti Raymi is the worship of the emperor of the Inca Empire, since he is descended from Inti. So it's a very elaborate holiday, which they keep up for kind of ceremonial and historic purposes. But they don't do some of the sections of it, which included the sacrifice. All right, so getting into the expansion of the Inca Empire. So just like the Aztecs, the Inca began to militarize and grow through their military. But after their initial militaristic push, we see that the Inca turned and lessened their militaristic presence and actually began to use a lot of diplomacy and other means to make people like happy to be a part of the Inca Empire. We'll see that the conquered people of the Inca are way more satisfied with the government and not as resentful towards the Inca as the people who were conquered by the Aztecs, since living under the Aztecs could be really stressful and violent. But initially, yes, the Inca do begin to expand through their military. So they start here in Cusco and they began to kind of move outwards here. After that initial push, as I said, one of the ways in which they made people kind of psyched to be part of the empire is that they allowed the local leaders to serve in the government. So they didn't oust all the leaders that they conquered. They essentially made them promise to be loyal to the Inca government, and then they let them keep their jobs. They also incorporated all the local deities of the people they conquered into their religion. So they never made someone give up their gods. They just said, you have to honor Inti. And besides honoring Inti, you can do whatever you want in your religion. So they were very open to other people's faith systems, which made people really like the Inca. They also instituted something called the Themita System, which I'll explain later on. But it was a way to help people out when they were in need. We can think of it as like a socialist volunteer system that created a safety net for communities if they were going through an emergency, if they were going through a crop failure, or if they just needed something like a road built. It was all provided for by the Themita System. And then just to appreciate how huge the Inca Empire is, it goes from all the way up in Ecuador, all the way down through Chile, right? So it's a very long empire. And it's very difficult to conquer this territory and to travel because of the Andes Mountains. And we'll explain how they did some of that in a little bit. So one of my favorite stories, just to tell you quickly, about when the Inca began to first expand, is the story of the Oros people. So the Oros people, if I go back to this map, the Oros people lived on this lake, this huge lake in the Andes Mountains called Lake Titicaca. And there are islands on the lake, but they lived right on the edge of the lake. And when the Inca came for them, this is when the Inca were still being pretty aggressive. The people of the Oros did not have a military, really. And so they knew they would just get, beat up if they just waited for the Inca to come. So what they did is they left the shoreline and they hopped in these reed boats and just rowed out to the middle of the lake, or really not even to the middle of the lake because Lake Titicaca is huge, but kind of rowed out to the lake with the hopes of waiting out the Inca expansion or the Inca invasion. But what happened is that the Inca were just like, we'll wait, and they didn't back down. So the Oros people just stayed out to the lake, and they stayed there through today. The Oros people built their communities on these reed rafts that they made out of the reeds that grow on the edge of the lake. And today, I don't know how many people still live in the Oros. I should look that up. But it's pretty sizable. I mean, last time I was there was a while ago, 2007, 2008. But back then, they had a school on one of these rafts. They had a post office. They had a member of Congress. So this is a city that they built on this lake. So this is one that's set up for visitors to come and check out, because otherwise everyone's like, no, I don't want tourists hanging out in my house. So you can go and visit a set up island and then not bother the local people there. There's a little kid who was hanging out, like drawing on it. So I saw it was fascinating that their answer to the Inca, since they couldn't fight them, was to run away. And then they end up building this whole community on these rafts, these reed rafts on the lake. All right, so a cultural effect of the Inca is the spread of their language, which is known as Quechua. So Quechua, which originally was only spoken in and around the area of Cusco, today you can hear it spoken all the way up in Quito in Ecuador and all the way down through Chile. So anywhere that the Inca conquered, they spread Quechua. So there are other languages too. So I remember when I spent time in and around like Puno and La Paz, between Peru and Bolivia, you heard a lot of Aymara, which is another indigenous language. but then those people also spoke a little bit of Quechua. So it's almost like how the British, when they create the British Empire, will spread English, the Inca spread Quechua. And what's helpful is that it unites the vast territory because there are so many languages that are spoken from all the way up north, all the way down south. But Quechua becomes a central language where everybody speaks a little bit of Quechua. So it becomes easier to trade, it becomes easier to communicate for governmental means or just for social means as well. So today, like I said, it's still spoken. And in fact, it's going through a bit of a resurgence as a way to show indigenous pride. Other elements I want to make us aware of in terms of the government is that the leader of the Inca Empire is known as the Sapa Inca. And he's an absolute authority, but he delegates his responsibilities to governors and then people who are underneath the governors, right? So everything goes back to the Sapa Inca, but he doesn't do everything alone. He creates a very complex government. And as I mentioned, he's considered divine because he claims to descend from Inti, the sun god. And so this is an image of that Inti Raimi, as I mentioned before. So people carrying the Sapa Inca. And so there's a lot of behaviors like that, very ceremonial behaviors where people carry the Sapa Inca. And one of the rules is like you don't really look directly at the Sapa Inca. It's like looking at the sun, things of that nature. The Sapa Incas, when they died, they would be mummified and put into this royal tomb. And I think this is kind of cool and maybe a little gruesome, but it's believed that their souls never go away. A central religious belief amongst the Andean people is the concept of the huaca, which are sacred objects that contain souls. This is a pretty common animist belief. And they believe that the mummified bodies of anyone who's mummified, that their soul stays there. And so when there were very difficult situations, the living Sapa Inca would ask for the mummies of the former Sapa Incas to be retrieved so he could consult with them. And so they would bring out the mummified bodies, go on like a parade with them, and then bring them to the Sapa Inca so he could ask them questions, almost like they're an oracle. So yeah, kind of cool, kind of dark. And so another thing to recognize is the capital of the empire is Cusco, not Machu Picchu, which we'll talk about Machu Picchu in a second, and that he did delegate power. A couple of examples of Andean religious practices before we move on to some other infrastructure things is that they believed in a few different sacred animals. So they believe in the condor, the puma, and the snake as having very special powers. The condor is the animal that protects the realm of the air or the heavens since they fly. And they're so beautiful. If, again, you ever have the chance to travel to Peru, there's a canyon, Colca Canyon, where you can watch the condors soar. It's unreal. The puma is the protector of the earth, the earthly realm. And then the snake is the protector of the underworld, right, which the snake is often in many religions doing that. Another popular religious practice are the shamans. So as we know, in many animist faith systems, priests and shamans who do a lot of divining and spirit possession and a lot of herbal medicinal practice are common. So they're also common in the Andes. And here is an Andean shaman. He's holding coca leaves. The coca plant is grown throughout like Peru, Ecuador, and up through Colombia. The coca plant is used as a big part of ritual and as well as medicine. They usually hold it in threes to do a blessing. The coca plant, you can chew it or you can brew it into a tea, and it helps with altitude sickness and digestive issues. It's also known because the coca plant can be processed in a couple different ways to be more intense. Very famously, people usually know that the coca plant, when it's processed in a particular way, becomes cocaine. When it's processed in a different way, it becomes novocaine, right, used for dental reasons or other localized anesthesia. But yeah, Andean shamans use lots of different herbs towards the jungles, they used ayahuasca, which is a far more intense hallucinogen to do certain religious practices. But they're still very, very prominent today in their work. Also, the Inca did do sacrifice. They did not do it nearly as often as the Aztec did. When they performed sacrifice, it was usually animal sacrifice. So they would sacrifice llamas and guinea pigs most often, as they were two animals that were indigenous to the area. When they did sacrifice humans, sadly, they usually sacrificed young people, mostly children, and a lot of like younger girls, which are children. Unlike the Aztec, they did not want to spill blood when they sacrificed. So they would not, do bloodletting. They wouldn't rip out anybody's hearts, anything like that. And we know this by the fact that many of these sacrificial victims were also mummified, but not purposefully. So this is actually a sacrificial victim who was nicknamed Juanita. Juanita the Ice Princess, they called her. Because commonly what they would do is they would take the young people up to mountaintops. And after giving them like a certain type of corn alcohol called chicha and maybe a different hallucinogen and doing a religious practice, they would bludgeon them on the back of their head and then leave them in the cold, leave them at the tops of these mountains. And then they, snow would pile on top of them and the cold would mummify their bodies. The reason they would sacrifice children is that for the Inca, they believed the gods wanted purity. They wanted individuals who represented absolute purity, people who did not commit sins. The Inca did believe in a concept of sin. And so they believed that children were the most pure, and so that's who the gods would want. So it's very sad and very grim. But again, I want to emphasize it didn't happen that often. But this is one individual. And the fact that there are so many bodies left behind gives us more information about how people were sacrificed, because people have done scans on these bodies, CAT scans and whatnot. All right, moving on. So a way that the government functioned was by using messengers who were able to keep information by using something called a Kipu. So the Andean civilizations, people in South America, did not have a writing system. And that's really important to remember, because it means that everything they did had to be a little bit more elaborate. So since they never developed a writing system, they had other ways to help keep track of information. And the Kipu was one of those big ways. So a Kipu was a belt made out of a bunch of knotted ropes. And the way that they knotted the ropes indicated numbers, right? So they came up with this decimal system that would help them remember a particular number. Each rope would be dyed a particular color that meant a certain category. So let's say red here meant population, white meant animals, blue meant food. And the Kipu was used by the Chosky. So the Chosky were the running messengers. So remember, as I said, there were no animals to help the Inca do anything, whether it was build buildings or roads or travel. So everything had to be done by foot. So the Chosky were running messengers who would run along the Inca roads. So the Inca built this very elaborate road system throughout the Andes, which again was a lot of manual labor. Some of these roads are still functioning today, and cars will drive down them. So they're pretty well made. Some of them have disintegrated over time. But so the Chosky, how it would work is that they would always be waiting at a station. And when they saw another Chosky coming their way, they'd start to warm up. And then the Chosky would run together for a while as the first Chosky would pass on the information to the outgoing Chosky, so that Chosky or runner would know the information that had to make its way to the capital or had to make its way wherever it needed to go. And so they would communicate that information, and he would show the new Chosky the Kipu and help him understand what the Kipu was telling him. And then the new Chosky would put the Kipu around his waist and do his leg of the run, which would be anywhere between 10 to 20 miles, so pretty long distance running. And so this is how they communicated information throughout the empire. by utilizing the Kipu and the running messengers known as the Chosky. So the Themita system, which I mentioned before, the Themita system is so essential to the Inca, and it's what made them popular amongst their conquered people. So in Quechua, mita means to take a turn. And to take a turn, by that, it means that sometimes it was your turn to volunteer, and other times it was someone else's turn to volunteer for the good of the empire. So it's a social safety net system and a form of mandatory public service. So if you were able-bodied, if you had the ability to give your time, you were supposed to give your time. So they recognize that some people maybe weren't healthy or maybe were too old to participate in the Mita, and you weren't forced to if it wasn't safe for you to work. But if it was, the way that it worked is that families would volunteer their labor, their time, or yields from their crops to the central government to support the military, to support the religious institutions, and to support communities in need. Right? So if you worked in the military or if you were a priest, you never had to farm. You never had to do stuff like that. You were supported by the community. But also, as I said, if you were a community that was experiencing a crop failure, or if there was like a mudslide, which happens a lot in the Andes Mountains, a group of people would be dispatched from the Themita system to help you, to bring you food, to dig out your homes from the mudslide, whatever it might be. So it's a philosophy of mutual assistance for everyone, for the sick, for the elderly, for the orphaned. Everybody was provided for. There were also a lot of massive state-run farms where all of the food produced on that farm would be distributed to the community in need. So once people learned of the Themita system, some people volunteered to be a part of the Inca. They gave up their autonomy to be part of the Inca because the Inca really cared for their communities. You knew that if something horrible happened, that the Inca would help you out through this system. So the Themita system really worked in providing aid and stability for everyone. All right, last little bit I want to show you is Machu Picchu, since that's kind of like the crown jewel of the Inca Empire. Machu Picchu, which is found high up in the Andes Mountains, was not the capital. It actually wasn't even a major city. It was almost like a vacation home and a ceremonial religious space. The most sacred space in Machu Picchu is actually not in Machu Picchu itself. So Machu Picchu is the town, right, where all the buildings are. The holiest space is actually at the top of this mountain that's right behind Machu Picchu, at the very top, called Huayna Picchu. There it's believed that there's a very sacred energy center, and that's where priests would do ceremony. But the buildings here are a really great example of Inca architecture. And oh yeah, I forgot. So I've been to Machu Picchu a few times, and the best time I went was when I traveled alone there, and I hooked up with this group that was hiking there through a alternate hike spot called oh my god, I forgot what it's called. I'll remember later. But so this was at like 7 a.m. and this was just a couple hours later. The Andes Mountains are no joke. We got caught in a blizzard. We had to kind of stick it out for a while in this one spot. It was kind of creepy, kind of scary, but it worked out. And then eventually we arrived at Machu Picchu. Right, so this is one of the passes we got stuck in because it was too overrun with snow. So I traveled with just a small group of people that I met while traveling. And these were our porters who helped us carry our bags and set up tents and stuff like that. Everybody else, like the travelers, all have very intense hiking gear. The dudes who are helping us, the porters, it's hard to see, but they're just wearing like Adidas slides and like basic sneakers. They were so badass. But anyway, this is the view of Machu Picchu from the top of Huayna Picchu, right, that mountain peak there. So you can see how high up it is. It was actually pretty scary. And these are some of the terraces, the terrace farms, because in order to farm, you had to build these in the Andes Mountains. And then I also want to show you, like I said, an example of Inca architecture. The Inca, when they built their buildings, they never used mortar. They just perfectly fit their stone. But they did this all without super advanced metallurgy. So they just had to be very exact in how they cut the rocks and fit them together. And many of these buildings have withstood lots of earthquakes throughout history, so they're very stable. So you can see these big rocks fit together perfectly. Yeah, more big rocks, but this is in a different site right here. So yeah, that's it. I'm going to pause there, and that's enough. So those are the Inca. Thank you.